Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriation, and Housing convenes this budget hearing. The budget hearing notices were given to the media on Monday, June 3rd, on Thursday, June 20th, and for the record, today is June 25th. The budget hearing is called to order as of 9:14.
Thanks, Tom.
The committee will hear and accept testimonies, both oral and written, on the budget of the Unified Judiciary. I'd like to acknowledge the senators that have joined me. I have to my immediate right, I have the oversight chair, is Senator Therese Terlai. To my left, I have Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano. And I have Senator Jim Moylan. The conduct of this budget hearing shall be as follows. Those testifying will recognize in the order of sign up on the sign-in sheet. We will begin with the Chief Justice, and then we'll move to Mr. Lezama, and then whoever the Chief Justice directs to speak on behalf of the courts. Written testimony may be read. Lengthy testimony should provide us a copy to the committee so that we can provide the staff and the senators a photocopy. Testimony shall be confined to the substance. We're here about the budget, so let's talk about the budget, okay? Persons will be allowed to present oral testimony as many times as required. And once you're done, please remain in the room for questions and for additional testimony as may be desired by the members of the panel. Proper form decorum shall be practiced by all present in the public hearing room for the proceedings. Individuals who fail to maintain proper form decorum may be restricted from providing oral testimony and or may be asked to leave or be escorted, removed from the room. I just, fair warning, if anybody is not following proper form and decorum, you're from the courts, you just escort yourself out, please, okay? Help us out. And when you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. Please state your name. We will now begin to hear testimonies on the fiscal year 2020 budget of the Unified Judiciary. Madam Chief Justice, ma'am.
Good morning, Senator, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to personally thank you for moving the hearing date of the originally scheduled date. I was on vacation in the mainland. Today, the court is prepared to answer any questions you may have about our budget request. We have the administrator of the courts and the deputy administrator present at the table, but behind me are all the managers and staff, so if you have a particular question about an area in the court, they can come forward to address it. Also present is Miss Annie Gale, who is the managing attorney at the alternate public defender office. We discussed whether she should be present, and your staff asked that she be present if there are questions about the request for the alternative public defender. We'll begin with Mr. Lezama, and then I'll conclude with a few remarks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Lezama, sir, you have a PowerPoint presentation, correct?
Yes, I do. First slide, please. Off-the-day, Senator San Agustin, our Oversight Chair, Senator Talahi, and members of the 35th Guam Legislature. Thank you all for the opportunity for giving our co-equal branch of government the time to present the Judiciary of Guam's budget request for fiscal year 2020. What you have in front of you was adopted on April 25th through Resolution JC 19-10 by the Judicial Council of Guam, represented today by Chief Justice Merriman. This product was a result of meetings with the Judiciary's managers in February and 2 budget working sessions with the Judicial Council. The details here were transmitted to all senators on May 1st as mandated by law. This process is the core of the Judiciary's policy options that are before the legislative branch today. The presentation today complements an effort that began with you all back on February 19th. If you recall, in that information briefing, we shared with you details on the workings of our trial and our appellate courts, to include our time standards and ongoing reform efforts in the judiciary. We also briefed you on our facility, the policy priorities, and this submission being one of those policy priorities. This presentation will focus on our FY2020 budget submission, specifically on restoring funding for our operations. We stand ready to answer any questions that you may have. Our focus in fiscal year 2020 is to, with your collective support, fill critical vacancies within our branch, continue to fund our electronic monitoring program, among other contractual services, funding for much needed technology upgrades to our network and our court security system, funding for jury stipends and indigent defense, funding for treatment in our specialty courts, and funding to support the appointment of an aide judge to sit on the Superior Court of Guam. Next, and approved by the Judicial Council, is a slightly lower budget than what was asked for in FY 2019. This budget was put together in line with our electronic monitoring program, are presented to you below the and the lowest of appropriations since fiscal year 2014. Again, the judiciary seeks. So what does our budget include? Personnel are our biggest costs. We propose to fill critical vacancies and proceed with the reinstatement of salary increments and merit bonus. Our branch has complied with the law, and though there is currently a freeze, we have not stopped the administrative process of completing our performance evaluations on all of our employees. Our managers remain diligent this whole year to ensure that this is done. So, if reinstated, we can apply such prospectively. Our budget includes funding for contractual services, to include funding for our therapists who support our therapeutic courts, software support for our case management and financial management system, and of course the leases to support our probation services division in the near future. We do have a number of important equipment purchases that need to be made, as we have reached the end of life with some of them. Critical services will be hampered should we not proceed with the necessary purchase of hardware, software upgrades, and maintenance to support our network. Additionally, we need to ensure that jury stipends are paid. In 2018, 14,400 jurors were present and participated in 788 grand jury cases and 48 jury trials. Also, utility costs are expected to rise, and we hope that we will get the support in the event utility costs do rise. Next slide. The next slide details our support for court-appointed attorneys. Case filings have become more complex and also have involved multiple parties across many of the case types, especially in criminal cases. The increase is in line with ensuring the alternate public defender is able to support the needs of indigent defendants that walk through our doors each day. Senators, if I can point out, if you look at the slide, there is a correction. The proposed FY20 budget is 1.376262. That's the correct amount. And it's noteworthy to mention that that is actually less than what the APD requested in fiscal year 19. Moving on to the next slide. The next slide is what was proposed, what the proposed budget versus what we actually received over the last couple of fiscal years. Important to note that this clearly shows where we stood following our presentation to you and the budget deliberations. The Guam legislature has listened to our call for funding, but in contrast with the final budget approval, this slide is an example that the judiciary of Guam, like our counterparts in the states, in other state judicial systems, which are heavily reliant on the other branches of government for funding, have found it difficult to obtain adequate resources even in good economic times. We were especially vulnerable to the recent economic downturn, which has been particularly severe to our branch. We have faced enormous challenges head-on in guiding our court through the current fiscal crisis. We believe that as a judiciary with a demonstrated track record of good governance and accountability, and this year ask for your assistance to restore funding levels to avoid unreasonable budget cuts that undermines the judicial system's ability to carry out its mission during difficult times. Next slide. Once again, thank you for the opportunity. I just want to point out that in previous budget hearings, we provided the information briefing prior to the actual numbers in the past. When we did that on February 19th, we decided in this budget hearing just to talk about the numbers, but we will make both this budget presentation slides and the information slides that were used on February 19th available to all members of the 35th Guam Legislature. So subject to your questions, this concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Zama. That was quite simple. Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
almost scary coming from the court, you know? But I understand. And I do, I have to acknowledge that, number one, I do agree with you. You're an equal branch of government. And we should find ways. And I'm hoping that with my colleagues, we're able to find ways to give you, I'm not going to say fully funded, but at least as close as possible, right, Chief Justice? As close as possible, because it wouldn't be fair to say, let's make sure that all the law enforcement are paid, are getting all their budget, but then where do they all go? They all go to you. They all go to your house. And then they say, take care of them. And then they walk away. And you're sitting there saying, how do we fund this? That's not fair. It's not right. But we will start the questions with your oversight chair, Senator Chalai, and then we'll move to Senator Moylan, and then Senator Kelly Marsh Taitno, and then, yes, ma'am, you wanted to make a statement?
I'd just like to make one comment, if I may. In the last week, we've reached the point of being very close to entering into a contract for electronic monitoring services. This is something the legislature has asked us to do to help relieve some of the Department of Corrections inmates that are there on pretrial detention, and also would assure safety to the community because the electronic monitoring will be in effect. We expect to sign the contract by Friday or Monday and implement the program. And if the numbers stay as we expect, we will be able to have around 100, up to 150 people on electronic monitoring with the funds that were previously made available to us by the legislature. So I just wanted to update you on where we are with that program. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Chalai.
Thank you and good morning, Chief Justice and all the members of the court. On the electronic monitoring, that's great news. The 150 people, I mean, I looked at the 2019 budget, so it said it allows for electronic monitoring, but out of your existing funds. So I really want to commend you for finding a way to do that, despite the cuts that were made last year in everyone's budgets.
Well, we were somewhat surprised because before the last governor left office, very late in his term, he did pass over the $500,000 that was appropriated, I think, in 2018. So it didn't really come from our budget, but it was funded
All right. Well,
finally
that's
by
great.
the executive branch.
Is the so do you, based on your current negotiations or contracts that you're about to enter into, do you believe this estimate of $300,000 will continue in 2020 to suffice for, and do you expect 150 people in 2020?
The request of $300,000, Senator, yes, will be sufficient to continue and support and maintain the electronic monitoring program once we implement it. We're looking at, again, using FY2018 appropriations to launch the program with up to 50 clients, detainees on the electronic monitoring program, which consists of both GPS tracking and radio frequency home detention. So the 300,000, yes, that will continue to support the electronic monitoring program
The same amount of people?
for the same amount of people.
Similar, okay.
Yes, Senator.
All right, thank you. And, all right, so overall, the budget, compared to last year, is about 5.3 million, but I understand, yeah, last year was a significant, we didn't, it was not what you had asked. You had asked for, I think, about 6 million more last year. So, as the chairman said, we're trying to get to as much of that as possible this year. There's an increase of $1.48 million in budget and $840,000 in benefits. And I just wanted to clarify, is this for organic growth, or this is, I think you said earlier, if it's going to also help to restore increments from 2019?
Correct. We're looking at implementing that. Our finance administrator in discussion, we're needing about 320,000 to implement that. But the increase is really organic growth. More importantly, the increase is to fill the critical vacancies that we've lost. In fiscal year 2018, we lost 28. Our current vacancies are over 50. And we anticipate an additional 5 to 10 employees retiring by the end of this fiscal year. So where you see the huge increase in our budget is in our personnel, and that's because we have a significant amount of vacancies. We want to reinstate the increments and the meritorious bonuses. We also want to ensure that we have the increments and the bonuses for fiscal year 2019.
All right.
2020, correction.
Okay. So I noticed that some of the agencies submitted only increments going forward for 2020 and did not submit an amount. So if you could just send to us separately the amount for just 2019, just in case, so
Yes.
we can balance that with the rest of the executive branch.
I can have that to you by this afternoon, to
Thanks.
all senators.
All right. And then, so contractual services increased by 1.6 million.
Correct.
In FY19, your budget for contractual was only 35,000. So it's a very significant change. And if you could just state on the record what those are for.
Sure. For contractual services, the budget request increase, or it's not really an increase, it's to restore the funding levels because we had tapped into our savings to cover most of those. And in some cases, we had actually decided not to implement, or based on our funding, we didn't fully implement those. But beginning with our management information system, we need about 527,000 just for our two primary case management system, which is JustWare and our New World systems. JustWare is our case management system. New World is our ERP, finance management and procurement. For probation, we need to receive additional funding and restore funding levels for our therapists. Our therapists play an important role in ensuring that our clients complete the treatment program. And we're also looking at our facilities because we do have ongoing maintenance costs for our chillers, air conditioning, our elevators, and just regular maintenance for our buildings, and that's around 99,000. So 527 for MIS and so forth.
For the therapists, you're saying that you contract therapists? This is not an in-house?
Correct.
I thought you have an in-house client services division, or?
Yes, the in-house client services, but these are for our therapeutic courts. And so with each of our therapeutic courts, we have to contract those specific therapists. That's for drug and alcohol intervention, counseling, and treatment. So those are specific to our therapeutic courts. And we need to maintain the treatment levels. And so we need to look at restoring that budgetary amount.
All right. I'm going to talk to you later, I guess, about the behavioral health, how you partner with them. But for now, we'll let that go. And what about Does this contractual amount then cover leases or not?
So what we're putting in is leases for 400,000. If you look at the judiciary property right now, one of the leases that we've actually canceled due to funding constraints is our employee parking lot. That's $107,000, 117. We're also looking at our storage and then our Northern Court satellite. Interestingly enough, our Northern Court satellite, the revenue that is received at the Northern Court is actually equivalent to the revenue that we receive in our Judicial Center. A lot of constituents, a lot of people go up to Northern Court and make their payments there. So we want to make sure that we make it accessible when it comes to payment, especially since a large majority people reside in the North, for them to make it convenient for them to go to the Northern Court, make their payments, fines, fees, pay their traffic citations. So it's important that we maintain that Northern Court. We're also looking at the employee parking lot, and we're also looking at our storage. We have things that we're working in FY2020 to help reduce some of our storage capacity and our storage needs. But until we do so, we would need appropriations for those 3 specific leases.
All right, and the Northern Court is the only place where the traffic court exists, is that right?
No.
Traffic court also takes place downtown?
Yes.
All right. On the miscellaneous budget, there's an increase of 405,000.
Yes, the miscellaneous budget, what we have is really the jury stipends. So in FY19, stipends were mainly funded by special funds. And the amount requested is to really restore the amount that have historically been funded through the general fund appropriations. So we're asking for it to be restored, that amount.
Same amount that you've been using, that you've incurred this year. And what special fund was that?
The jury fund.
So what happens to the
Client
jury?
Services Fund.
Pardon?
Judicial Client Services Fund.
All right. So what will happen with that special fund then, if you don't use it for these jury stipends?
It'll still be there and made available for the other things that we fund out of there.
At client services?
Yes.
All right. Maybe if we could just get a little report on that also.
Sure.
On the side. Thanks. So then and you talked about the increases in utilities. So there's a significant request for 465,000 increase in power alone, and 114,000 in travel or mileage reimbursement. And I know that you've told me that most travel is federally funded now. So this is 114,000. What would that be for?
That'll actually be for locally funded travel. Over the last 2 years, we've decreased the amount used under local funding for travel. In fact, this fiscal year, I believe it's less than $10,000 that we've used for local travel based on our appropriation levels. One of the things that's important is as we continue to improve the judicial system, we do need to consider sending our judicial officers and our staff to training conferences that are available stateside mainland. And I'll use the adult drug court as an example. Back in the late 90s, the presiding judge was able to go and attend a conference. He learned information about our adult drug court. He brought it back. At that time, we worked it, we applied for a grant, we received the grant. So that is important for us to maintain. And so where it seems like it's a huge amount of money, what happens is when we go to these conferences, when we go to these trainings, we also link up with our counterparts in the States that also advise us of any grant funding that's available, and then we will go after the grants. So the process has actually been very helpful. We started with our adult drug court, our juvenile drug court. We now have a veterans treatment court, mental health court, and all that was started by judicial officers and staff going off island, attending these specific trainings and conferences, learning, and then coming back, applying for the grants, and then proceeding forward. So that's what's benefiting the island, is our ability to be able to go to these conferences. Yes, it is huge. It's 116,000 that we're requesting. But if you look at restoring that, we're able to maintain. And one of the things that we need to do is, in the evidence-based training, there's always something new that's coming up. So if our judicial officers and our staff don't learn the latest and greatest, they don't learn how things have changed, then we may be stuck in doing old business, old stuff, and that's not helping the island. So that is important for us to restore. With regards to our utilities, we were using whatever reserve funds we had to pay for our utilities. And we did that because personnel is our biggest cost. So when we cut personnel, when we didn't fund personnel, we looked at our reserves to maintain the core values. In order for us to have a court hearing, well, we need power, we need water, we need this. So using our reserves to pay for those basic needs was critical. And so that's what we did. We just paid for the critical stuff in fiscal year 18, halfway through the fiscal year, and more importantly, this fiscal year. That's what we're doing. But we have since depleted those reserves.
But you expect the power to increase by $400,000.
We are actually looking at that as an estimate, but we actually have tapped our reserves to pay that. So
you've exceeded the budget in FY19 of $462,000 for power.
No, Senator, we didn't use any of the FY19 appropriated funds.
we tapped the reserves.
We used reserves, so it's not an increase of 40, that's roughly our power obligation.
All right, so what is your expected power obligation? 400, you're currently tracking what?
I don't have that in front
All
of
right.
me, Your Honor. I can,
Okay.
Senator, I can get that to
I'm
you.
gonna guess this is similar to what you're tracking now, and it's not a huge increase in
Right.
what you're currently using. All right, and so just for the APD, so in FY19, they were operating with a $1.19 million budget, and this one would be 2020 would be 1.37. That's like 2 million. No, 200,000. I guess I'll just let that go. Or if you want to explain, is that for an additional personnel or? Just, it looks like there's about approximately $200,000 increase in the alternate public defender.
Well, it's not really an increase. What happened was we requested a certain amount, then everybody got cut 15%, so we just made do with what we had. And so the increase that we have is not really an increase. We actually have a decrease for this fiscal year. So it wasn't a personnel thing. People left or
Okay,
yeah.
so you were able to make do, but
We weren't
this
able
is just status quo operations. All right.
pretty much.
Thank you. All right. And so, yeah, you've broken down the cost for the new judicial officer request, 400,000. The adult this is a request for adult reentry program, 81,000. This was just, I remember we just did in the last term, a bill to put that in the statute at the request of the judiciary. And at that public hearing, they had said they would not need additional funding to run that court. And so what is the 81 going to cover?
The 81,000 for the adult reentry court actually covers the case manager and the data entry clerk that's needed for the program. We're seeing an increase in the number of individuals that would qualify based on the numbers that they currently have. They've identified a need to hire a case manager and a data entry clerk. There are a lot of data entries. There are a lot of statistics that are needed to sustain those programs through our grants. And so it's important that we have the case manager and the data entry clerk to do that work.
This adult reentry court is limited to very nonviolent offenses, and with the recent increase in these criminal sexual conduct offenders, we're looking for another way to more I guess, just to increase assessment of the release of those offenders, and some have suggested a program similar to this reentry court. And
Correct.
I guess we'll continue discussions on that, but yeah, if you have any report of how this has operated since it's been, I know it was a pilot program that and the presiding judge led, and that it's been in place, I don't know, maybe a little while now. Just if there's anything that you could give us that shows the effectiveness of it, then that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will have that to all senators.
We did have one graduation,
Yes.
and I don't know if you were present, but
I wasn't able to make the graduation, but I did see the announcements. Yes, congratulations. So the DWI court is also increasing 89,000. Now, all of these courts were by grant at first, and now, so the 89,000 is again for salary and benefits for the DWI court.
Correct. That's for a case manager and a probation services assistant. The DWI docket is actually one of our hugest docket at the judiciary. There is an increase in the number of clients or people that are referred into the DWI court. So with that increase, yes, we are requesting for funding to support the number of referrals into the DWI court program.
But, okay. All right. All right, in the 2018 annual report, it shows a decrease in cases filed in the Superior Court from 14,412 in 2017 to 11,021 in 2018. Decrease of 24% has, and I think it shows a consistent decrease in cases filed over the last 5 years. Is that a correct observation? I'm looking at the annual report.
That is correct. There is a decrease, but as I pointed out when we were discussing or presenting the alternate public defender, the complexity of the cases that involve multiple individuals, multiple defendants, when you're looking at the treatment courts that require more court proceedings, the complexity of the cases itself are there.
Over the same time, I think they've also increased the number of magistrates, and you still have 2 magistrates, 1 referee, and we've increased the treatment courts. And I'm seeing now the budgets for treatment courts are increasing.
Yes. And if you look at the treatment courts, Senator, that's where the increase is for personnel, and for the increase that's also there is for the treatment providers to restore the funding levels. That's where you see the increase in that treatment court appropriation.
Okay. Yes, and then, in light of the request for an additional judge, I just wanted to go over those figures because like the Attorney General, when we talked to them about their budget, they also mentioned that increasing, the number of judges is going to increase their budget request also, and I'm guessing public defender might be the same, but for sure the Attorney General has said that to me that, because in order to cover all the courtrooms, they literally need more people. Yeah, so I'm just...
Senator, if I might add to the case filings that you alluded to earlier, in 2018 we did see a reduction in overall case filings, but I will note that we saw perhaps a bigger decrease in the number of traffic citations being filed.
Okay.
And so for the most part, it wasn't really in other case types, but we did see an increase in criminal felony filings.
Increase.
And then we're starting to see an increase in probate case filings, and so in other areas, but perhaps the traffic citation filings could be attributed to the police officers not enforcing the...
Thank you for bringing that up. And that's something that we've discussed before, that you've noticed a significant decrease in traffic filings, citations. So that's something that we should discuss perhaps with GPD also.
Ma'am, could you identify so we'll know who you are, because it's
Oh,
being
sorry.
recorded.
Yes, Senator
Please.
Danielle Rossetti, the Superior Court Clerk of Court.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, but could you also just tell us about the Judicial Building Fund? So what uses would that be put to now? If it's not going to be put to paying these rentals, because those are now in your budget request?
Okay, so the Judicial Building Fund continues to be used to pay off the existing loan. In addition, it'll pay for the lease of the Route 4 building. It also included within the JBF is the funding that we set aside for the Guam Police Department lab up in DC.
Mr. Rizam, can you start again from the beginning, because we kind of like missed when you were talking about what the
Yes.
judicial fund's going to
Could you
pay
give
for?
us amounts also, please?
Yeah.
Yes, we will have the amounts to all senators. The JBF is used to pay the existing loan. We also have funding to go to the crime lab for the Guam Police Department at GCC, and then we also have it for our Route 4 lease. So we currently have that being funded under the Judicial Building Fund.
All right. And, okay, so it's my understanding also that we've expanded the authority of magistrates to handle a lot more cases, and so they handle traffic, small claims, or referees also, child support. And so if you exclude those from those numbers, yeah, I'm curious to see what the numbers end up being for the caseloads. But I'll do those calculations, I guess, unless you have those already available.
Are you asking for the numbers of cases assigned to each judicial officer?
Well, I
including
guess
the
just the
magistrates?
confirmation have the cases decreased.
I mean, clearly the data shows the decrease in case filings, but that doesn't necessarily equate to the decrease in the work that each judicial officer conducts when presiding over the case that is filed. You know, in a lot of the therapeutic courts, what we are observing is that, for example, the adult drug court, the judge requires the defendants to appear more regularly in their court so that they can ensure that you are following the treatment program. So there's clearly, although there may have been only 200 drug cases filed last year, the amount of time that a judicial officer and court staff spend to just handle one case to rehabilitate one defendant does not equate to the number that is actually shown here. So while the magistrates do assist the judges over certain matters like magistrate hearings and arraignments, and they do oversee and handle small claims matters and civil collection matters, you'd be surprised to see how many pro se defendants file small claims actions and come in, and we have small claims hearings almost every day at both the Northern Court Satellite and also the Hagåtña Court, in addition to traffic cases. So there's quite a bit. Sometimes we, you know, I'm very firm with the magistrate judges to say we have to have hearings every day because people want their small claims cases resolved in a shorter time period than what we would realistically be scheduling.
Thank you, thank you. And I want to thank all of you for your work. I know that there is I mean, I'm just talking about the numbers, but I know that there still is a significant caseload for everyone and even all the employees to handle. And so I just want to thank you all for your work, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Chulai. And I'd like to also recognize a colleague that has joined us, Senator Tello Taidagui. We will now proceed to Senator Jim Winnan. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question regarding the court-appointed attorneys and rolling that in with the new judicial officer. This would help also expedite the cases that are pending to be heard. I suppose getting back to the court-appointed attorney, can you give me an idea of, is there a backlog of how many cases that need to come before the court, and how the additional attorney will help you expedite and get the processes going?
I believe that question is, are you referring to the alternate public defender?
Right, the alternate public defender.
Hi, Senator. I'm not sure what you mean when you say backlog.
I'm just wondering if this additional person will help these cases that are still pending to come before the court. Isn't there so much on your list of cases that need to be heard, and how would the additional public defender help in getting those cases presented and expediting the process?
Well, in my office, right now we have 4 attorneys, and we're supposed to have 6 attorneys, but because of the budget cut from last year, we've only been able to really fill 5 positions. So yes, having a 6th attorney would help, because we, right now, actually appear in front of 8 judges, including the, 2 magistrates, as well as the family division with Judge Ingalls, right. So we actually do go in front of all 8 judges. So of course, it would help if I had another lawyer to apply to, to have more attorneys fill those hearing spots. Because when the court has calendar, we have to show up. And sometimes we're put on 2nd call, 3rd call, 4th call, but we show up. So I believe that the 8th judge that the judiciary, correct me if I'm wrong, would maybe be a civil judge, but I'm not sure about that. But even if they have another judge, that would be 9 judges actually. I guess I'm misspeaking. It's not 8 judges we have to go appear. We have to appear before 8 court officers. Right.
Okay, thank you. Also, GPD is looking at additional officers too. They have 1 in cycle now with their classes, right? And then they have requested 30 more. Tell me how you anticipate this will get you guys even more busy. Do you foresee more cases coming before you? And how would this trickle down?
We hope that the increase in police officers will mean an increase in traffic enforcement. But we have definitely noticed, especially in the juvenile area, very few prosecutions. And the Attorney General's office says for example, the juvenile investigation section was severely affected and transferred to the drug task force. So investigation of juvenile crime was not as frequent as it probably could have been. And then there's other areas where we've noticed a decrease in filings, and I think just having officers investigating and working on those crimes will mean more prosecutions. Maybe not immediately, but certainly as they build back the police force to what the level used to be, we should see an increase in prosecutions.
So additional arrests, additional prosecutions, and then the next phase, of course, will be incarceration, I suppose, as well.
Yes.
So everybody is all affected, and where we need to help boost the GPD, where we need to boost judiciary and also DOC. Would that be correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. On your parking situation, I used to go visit you guys a lot, and now I'm no longer visiting as much as I used to, but I also tried to not be there on the days when jury was called in. But now we understand that parking situation is not the same. What are the long-term solutions that you are considering to help with the parking situation?
One before you today for your consideration, of course, is an appropriation for funding so that we can lease the employee parking lot and have that made available. We've also looked at our Route 4 building. That is currently being utilized for parking for our employees. We're working with, of course, the legislature for the use of the former DOA parking lot. We're also talking to the administration for the use of the government house parking lot for our jurors. And so we're drafting an MOU. We've had talks with the administration, possibly using that, the government house parking lot for our jurors, which would mean that they would be shuttled to and from that parking lot by our marshals. So we're exploring all the options that are available. There is parking along Martyr Street, Archbishop Street for the employees. Granted, it is not convenient. It's not at all. For some employees, it's very inconvenient to park further away, but we don't have the funding. And that's why we're requesting for the appropriation of that so that we can at least make that available.
If I may
There's
add,
also
just-
strategies
Yeah.
that the clerk of court is going to talk about right now.
We have been struggling with parking for jurors. You know, one of the things we try to do is we want to make jurors experience on the island a very rewarding and memorable experience when they come before the court to serve their civic duty. We also do an exit survey as they complete their jury service, and one of the key areas that they ask to be improved upon is the parking facilities. And so we tell our staff, you have to park away from the courthouse because the jurors, when we have jury trials, have first preference in the red slots. And so we try to accommodate them because we want them to, we had a juror a few weeks ago driving around for 30 minutes trying to find parking and the jurors group went into the courtroom and was late. And so, those kinds of things we try to avoid. We have to schedule with our judges the timing of when we bring jurors in. You can't all bring in 3 or 4 jury pools at one time. So, it's been a struggle for us to try and accommodate our jury trial processes for jurors that come into the court. So parking is a very big issue, not just for the jurors, but for the employees as well.
Thank you. I like the ideas and suggestions there. The governor's house parking lot, that's great, and shuttling it down, that's at least a temporary solution while we hopefully get you more money for a permanent parking place. One thing I maybe consider for getting more money, I've noticed a lot of jaywalking coming from Ganya Shopping Center on over to the courtroom, different people just crossing the street here and there. If we had a marshal out there, we increase that ticket fine to something and it goes directly to you guys for your parking, maybe to consider that. As long as they're not court employees.
Well, Senator, we're also trying to work with DPW, Department of Public Works, and looking at actually a better crosswalk along West O'Brien Drive with a flashing light and signage just to make drivers aware. I know the jury commissioner reminds the jurors that parking at the Ganya Shopping Center is unauthorized. Some do, and they chance running across Route 4. But we do encourage all employees and the patrons to use the crosswalk, to really use the crosswalks.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question regarding the electronic monitoring agreement. Are those monitors, are they leased equipment or are we purchasing that?
I need to bring up our staff attorney because as the chief procurement officer, I don't think I can be discussing that. Or the chief probation officer.
Good morning. This is Christina Beard, staff attorney for the Judiciary of Guam. Choking. So as far as the electronic monitoring contract that we're entering into, we rent the equipment, for lack of a better term. We're not purchasing the equipment. And then our provider will provide all the monitoring services. Our probation office will react on alerts. They will also, alongside our vendor, work in establishing what particular type of electronic monitoring will be used for a particular defendant, and will do home assessments to make sure that it works for them. But as far as directly to answer your question, the equipment will be the vendor's equipment. So at the end of our contract term, the equipment will be returned to the vendor. They are also responsible for all the repairs, the upkeep, the cleaning, the installation, and the de-installs of the equipment. That will not be bore on the judiciary the first year.
Thank you. What would the cost be per, I'm going to be the customer, for example. What does that cost per one person on an electronic monitoring device?
The contract right now under negotiation is on a per-day basis. I can give you the range because we're still trying to get it farther down. It's on an I don't want to say average, it would be between $5 to $6 a day for a defendant, recognizing there's two types of equipment. There's radio frequency and there's GPS, and a particular defendant has to qualify per our probation officer's determination which one they would would be acceptable for their particular situation. So it's on a per-day basis. Its average is, I think safely to say, $6 a day. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. And I just wanted to say I had the opportunity for jury duty, but now I understand I'm off the list as elected. So I appreciate all you do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. When you got me worried when you said you always visit the court. I was wondering if you're under the electronic monitoring, so he was checking in, you know. But you know, I have a simple question: is that, you know, if you get arrested and you get released, instead of us worrying about if you're doing a crime again, maybe that's another way of tracking the folks. But I don't know if that would work legally or if it's civilly okay, but that's something that I'd ask the courts, because every time somebody's arrested and they send them to the courts and you release them maybe under $50,000 or whatever amount, what everybody worries about is that if that individual committed a crime, if he's going to do it again. And it seems to be that's what a lot of the people in Guam are worried about, is that you committed one crime today, 6 months down the line you repeat the same crime, and then everybody wonders what's happening in the court, what's happening in the police department, not realizing that there isn't a mechanism, I guess, to monitor. Unfortunately, you commit a crime, you pay the time, right? And that includes put the device on you. But I'm just wondering if the court has ever considered that and bring it before the legislature, where some mechanism to monitor the unfortunate folks that commit crimes. I'm just wondering if Mr. Rizal, maybe you might want to answer it before I ask Senator Kelly Mars to start her question.
So what we're looking at is implementing the electronic monitoring program for those that are currently in the system, and we're going to ensure that those that are charged in the court, not arrested, but actually charged in the court, that are on pretrial will be eligible. Now, eligible just means, okay, we have to do an assessment of your home. We have to do an assessment of the individual. Are they in a particular risk level? Are they high risk, low risk, medium risk, moderate risk? Obviously, the concern is those that get rearrested. So if somebody is high risk, I would doubt that the probation officer will make a recommendation to a judicial officer to put somebody on electronic monitoring if they're high risk. Those that are eligible to be released on their own recognizance, those that are low risk, there are other means to get out of DOC or jail. But we're looking at implementing it based on those that are eligible, those that can be on the program, because part of it is, like the staff attorney identified, the home has to be assessed so that the instrument or the monitoring equipment that we need to use can work. If someone is staying in a wooden tin structure home with no power, no water, we won't be able to connect those systems. Those that are homeless, where are we gonna connect the system? Because it has to be charged. And if we're not able to charge it, we may not recommend, the probation officer may not recommend to the judicial officer for that individual to be released. So there are a lot of assessments that will need to occur. The assessment, eligibility, assessment, recommendation to the judicial officer for release. We are looking at is GPS, 24-hour tracking of anybody placed on electronic monitoring. We're also looking at a radio frequency device for those in which the judicial officer required them to be on house arrest. Don't go anywhere. Stay at home, come to court, go to your attorney. If you have a medical appointment, you can go. So we're looking at two different electronic monitoring options, GPS tracking and radio frequency for both house arrests and for those that are on GPS. If you're working, you get arrested, you get recommended, and your employer wants you to continue working, then GPS tracking may be the best option. Because if we lock them up and they lose their jobs, they can't feed their families. But that's why we're looking at eligibility and looking at making those assessments and making the recommendations to the judicial officers whether or not to release them or not, whether or not to put them on electronic monitoring or not, and so forth.
Okay, I see he's itchy to speak. So please,
Yeah,
feel
well,
free.
you know,
You may be able to.
Senator, you
add on.
bring up a good point. We have, the system is configurable to the point where we can establish zones, high-risk zones. Like say if you're a sex offender and we don't want you to be going near any of the schools, the system can set up a zone that if he goes anywhere near those zones, the alert would inform the probation officer or the vendor, and we'd be able to react and say, you're not in your area, you're out of your zone. So we can establish hot spots to say, with the defendant to say, if you go in any of these areas, it's a violation and you're done. You're going to go back. And people know when they're being monitored 24 hours, 7 days a week, they normally won't want to do the things that are going to put them back. So if they're already, you sit down with them and you say, you cannot drive on these areas, you got to stay away from all these key places, they'll have to adhere to those release conditions. So it's configurable to say, if I don't want you going anywhere near this area, we'll know if you did and when you did and how long you were there. So that helps with the investigative process. So the system can do this.
Okay, thank you. Senator Kelly Mars Titan, ma'am.
Mananasi Ju'us, and thank you all for the time of coming here and answering the questions as thoroughly as you have thus far. I want to commend you for how well that you have dealt with the fiscal crisis. You've been creative, you've been looking for alternate sources. Those are all such important things. You're looking to network and partner with others to come up with solutions. But with that being said, I do understand that there is a breaking point to such coping strategies, that at some point there needs to be relief. And so we will definitely be keeping those things in mind when it comes to the need to update software, the need to not be dipping into the reserves to handle important issues such as power and so forth. So there have been a lot of questions thus far. Some of them have overlapped with the ones that I outlined, so I just have a few. With the federal funding being leveraged, as I said, that has been positive, and you said that you're looking for additional points to be doing that thus far. I think in some of the meetings that we had prior to this, you were saying that there are some matching grants. So I guess just so that we can understand, maybe if you could outline, I think for the update in some of the system software, there's going to be a matching federal component. Is that correct?
I'll bring up Serena Mariana, our court programs administrator.
Good morning, Senators. I'm not sure if you're speaking about our grants with upgrades to the GPD APHIS system, Guam's APHIS system. I'm not quite sure what matching you're talking about. For our technology grants that we have at the court, we meet the match requirement primarily through personnel, salaries and benefits.
Okay, so there is some federal matching funding that's being offered, so that when we're looking at the budget, we understand that that's the local part, but we are having that assistance that we're leveraging and being able to look at that as an opportunity.
Sure. We try our best to keep our match requirements to in-kind. Where we're required by the grant to match with local funds, we do so, and we try to do that with personnel costs and funding critical areas like drug testing kits if the grant does not have sufficient funding to cover that.
We do have the CJAC, which is the Commission on Criminal Justice Automation Commission. The the court has been the primary coordinator of that commission for the past 20 years. And it's through that commission that we're able to receive a lot of federal money that goes to the entire criminal justice system, not just the court. And we do that a lot through the Bureau of Statistics. They get the main federal grants, and we recently were able to completely upgrade the Guam Police Department system. We're now working on the fingerprint AFIS system. So we do get a lot of federal money in through that commission. We have pending legislation. We were asking the legislature to make that a permanent statutory commission. But that's where, in addition, the court gets some minor separate federal funding for our tech systems, but for the entire criminal justice system, most of the money comes through the grants through CJAC and the Bureau of Statistics.
So to this, Maasi, for helping me understand those two aspects, how the matching funding or is matched, that it's through in-kind as much as possible and personnel, so those are part of our processes already. And to understand, I just think it's important for us to all to realize that we really are trying to leverage that element, and so that when you're coming before us, these are things that may not be able to be leveraged, but that you're doing that due diligence and really trying to bring that in to serve all of our community in that way. I do also want to mention, and I will follow up on it myself, is for the Hagatna Restoration and Redevelopment Authority, we have talked about parking. They have looked at 3 different ways to set up parking, if not more, but I now have this thought that I need to make sure that we've adequately considered the Judicial Center, and we want to make sure that we keep that at the forefront of our thinking, that while we're thinking about the new buildings, we're also accommodating those that have been here all along. The judiciary has been here most consistently as a government presence in Hagatna, and so I will follow up on that and make sure that those considerations, but that the court administrator is included in some of those discussions. I wanted to provide an opportunity, so we've had some discussion here talking about the therapeutic courts, and so I wanted to provide some opportunity here for you to explain a bit about whether these have been successful, so that when people see that there are these costs associated, they can also understand the success of them, and whether they are a more expensive way of or type of court to administer, but if the success is there, it helps us understand what we're going to be funding and help justify it potentially.
Thank you, Senator. With any of the therapeutic courts, it does cost more. There's treatment involved. Where you see the success is in the recidivism rates. So for traditional probation, when I served as the chief probation officer, our recidivism rate was as high, it was like 50 to 60%. Comparing that to a therapeutic court approach, the recidivism rate in most of our therapeutic courts was less than 15%. So there is success. It's limited, it costs more, but if you just base it on recidivism, the percentage, it's worth funding. And that's really where you have it. So if you go through the therapeutic courts, you receive the treatment. You are able to go back out into the community and work, support your family. Traditional supervision doesn't work if there's no treatment, there's no education, there's no counseling, to the point where they don't work. Then what do? So that's why I'm a big supporter of therapeutic courts, because I've seen how the recidivism rates have helped and it's gone down versus traditional supervision.
And if I may, one of the early courts we did was the family violence court. And the reason we did that is there's a recognition that if there's physical abuse going on in the family, even if there's the traditional go to jail for a year, 6 months or whatever, likely the abuser's going to go back to the family. So it's much better for the community's safety and the welfare of children who are often innocent victims of family violence, that there be treatment, there be intervention to try and bring an end to the abuse, rather than just put the person in jail and then let them go back and continue. So with all the therapeutic courts, there's the traditional purpose of the criminal justice system, which is to community safety, but that extends also to the community members like the children and other family members. Even in the drug and alcohol courts, if there's rehabilitation of the offender, his family is better off because of it.
So just Masi for that. I think that's really important for people to hear. I remember at the beginning of this year, that's really good for our community. It speaks to the recidivism, the having a much lower rate of repeat offenders, as you mentioned. And as you mentioned, Your Honor, the safeguarding of our children, the safeguarding of our community, trying to intervene and change those behaviors. So I think those are really important considerations when we're looking to fund perhaps a higher cost of running the courts, but we're seeing some very, very positive results for all of us. So I think that's important. We've also talked a bit about having far fewer traffic violations. In fact, it was quite drastic, the drop in number. I don't remember the number completely on my own, but I think it was a loss of something like 75% or more less than what we've had previously. We've talked a little bit about how part of that is due to having fewer police officers. Some of that's going to be changing. Are there any other losses of income that you're dealing with now? And with the fewer traffic violations and possibly these other losses of income, what measures are you taking to address those?
I wouldn't consider a loss of income a reduction of our appropriations over the last 2 years has significantly impacted our operations. In FY18, we were appropriated $34 million. Based on the governor's fiscal realignment plan, we went down to $31 million halfway through a fiscal year. This current year, obviously it's a little less, it's 30.5. We recognize that there's a fiscal crisis that the island is experiencing, so that's why we've tapped into our reserves. But we do need to restore our appropriation levels, and that's what we're really requesting from you today, is to restore our appropriation levels so that we can continue to do the great things that we're getting commended for. And we want to continue to do that. If you look at where we are at financially, we've had to make drastic cuts. At the beginning of this fiscal year, I issued a memorandum that says we're not going to recruit, we're not going to go travel, we're not going to pay for drug testing supplies, we're not going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that's based on what we were appropriated. We live within our means. And so if we only receive 30.5, well, we're going to operate at 30.5, keeping to the basic core functions of the courts. So that's where we're at. We lost several employees. We have equipment that should have been replaced years ago. We're asking for that appropriation now. We've reduced some of our therapeutic court costs. We're asking for that to be restored now. We've touched our reserves to pay for our utilities and our core functions. we're asking for that appropriation to be restored in FY20. If we do not receive, obviously every year we go through it. Whatever we're appropriated, we have to decide and prioritize what are the priorities for each of the fiscal years. Unfortunately, in FY18, when we took the drastic cut of $4 million, we did a lot back in March. And moving forward, I think our managers, every employee appreciates the fact that they get a paycheck every 2 weeks. We're striving to ensure that we have that done. In order for us to do that, we have to have our facilities operational. So we're trying to just stick to the basics. I only request for that our appropriations be restored. Thank you.
For the last question that I have, and thank you for that answer. As I was saying earlier, it's really important for us to consider that. Of course, it's considering that in balance with a lot of agencies that are in the same position, and obviously we want to do the best we can to support each of you, and we recognize the importance of what you're doing. The last question that I have is if there are any plans in place to update the search function of the compiler of laws. So we appreciate having that in place, but we're interested in knowing if there's any update plan.
The compiler of laws, Senator Tlahi had a bill to revamp the compiler's work. We have implemented updates to our software and inputted as much data as possible to make searches available to Supreme Court opinions, statutory law, and we're now working on Superior Court case decisions.
Good morning. Thank you for the question, Senator. Jerry Cepeda, compiler of laws. We do have the functionality on the website. When you're talking about, I guess to clarify in terms of improvements, do you mean to the software itself and to the interface or to the material? As Chief Justice mentioned, we do have quite a lot of material available. And part of the hampering in terms of uploading is, again, the lack of staff that we have at MIS. At the judiciary, we are limited to one person who is dedicated to this project. Again, if we were full staffed, I could anticipate using, hopefully, another person in MIS, or maybe what we've been relying on our college interns, who've been a great help. But with new staffing or with more staffing, we'd be able to implement more material. In terms of the interface, though, if you're looking at whether we would get a new computer program, that's another cost that we look into. Right now, we do have something relatively low cost that our computer programmers here have extensive experience in using. So it's been working. It's not as fancy as some of the paid, the high cost bells and whistles, but it does have a pretty useful interface, and we are gradually working on ensuring that we have more and more material available for searches. Thank you if that answers your question.
Yes, so it's good to hear that there's more material that's being added to that system, and to understand where we're at least with the software, that there's a lot of experience in using it, that there have perhaps been some updates to it, but hopefully at some point we'll all be looking at something that provides better feedback, might be the way to say it. So like for our office, what we have to do is we have to download a lot so that we can search through it ourselves. And but it's good to hear that you're working on that, and that perhaps there would be a new computer program that would provide more functionality, more searchable functionality in the future.
I completely understand and I agree, because when the bill was introduced to revamp to ensure that functionality was on the website, we had requested for funding to ensure it happened. Obviously, it didn't happen, but with more funding, we could explore more user-friendly options. Thank you.
Sujuas Masi. Thank you again, and those are all my questions.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Titlery.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to apologize for being late, but thank goodness to technology. As soon as it started, I was listening, and on the way driving here, of what you had to say in your presentation. So I apologize for that. And first, I don't want to forget this, because usually after line of questioning, I was like, oh, I forgot to say this, but I just wanted to thank you, Chief Justice Merriman, for the time you served at the Judicial branch, Judiciary. You've done an excellent job. I've heard so many great comments. You had me in tears at your island address, and I just wanted to recognize you for all the great things you've done. And stay there, please.
Thank you.
And keep my picture on your desk, okay, for that. I don't mean to drag out the talk that Christine, you brought up with regards to the, electronic monitoring. I just want to know how much, you mentioned that it was $500,000 that the executive branch gave you to pay for some of the stuff that you had. So my question is, how much does it cost yearly to have, I mean, I know it depends on how many people are using these electronic monitorings, but how much are you estimating a year?
We are estimating it to be $300,000 a year.
Okay.
Part of the appropriations that we received through FY18 is being used for the service. Appropriations are going to be used to purchase much-needed equipment that will be used by the probation officers and the marshals for supervision and enforcement. We need radio communication equipment. We need to purchase that. So we're looking at purchasing radios. Some of the work may be done at night, so basic stuff like flashlights and stuff that they can use, and possibly a vehicle, if we have enough funding to purchase a transport vehicle. Our current fleet of vehicles, we have 48 vehicles. The average age of our vehicles, make and model, is a 2009.
Okay.
So we need to use part of that to purchase the equipment, but $300,000 to sustain.
Okay, and then the other $200,000 that you received from the $500,000 from the executive branch is going to go to those areas. Thank you for
Correct.
explaining that too as well. And I'm sure you're going to expend all that, right? Now, according to the executive budget that was submitted to the legislature, the executive branch actually had you at $35,853,293,000. Now, I don't know if you have the opportunity when you're creating your budget to, collaborate with the executive branch and requesting. I know that in the past, you've visited with the governor's office to talk about your budget. But here it's showing that the governor is giving you at $35 million. Your request is at $36. So there is a difference in that. I'm pretty sure you know that as well. Now, also in FY19, your federal funds that came in, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's $5,851,929, is that correct?
Let me get that for you.
And while you're looking at that, I believe that this year's projections on federal funds, if I'm not mistaken, is $6,336,440. Can you also check that? If you don't have it right now, it's okay. You can send it to us, like you've been saying all afternoon. All the senators are going to get it, so thank you for that.
You can send that, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
so
Senator. We'll take
just to double check your federal funds that are coming in.
Okay.
And all these federal funds that was utilized last year, if I'm not mistaken, of the $5,000,008, has all of that been expended? All federal funds?
All federal funds for the current fiscal year will be expended by September 30.
Okay.
We
That's
do
good to
not
hear.
return federal funds. We're
That's what I
working
wanted to
really
hear.
hard
Yeah.
to ensure that what we request in federal funding, we use in federal funding.
Okay, thank you. Danielle, you mentioned with regards to the caseloads that you're seeing, you're giving a comparative of how many the caseloads are lower in compared to last year. But I want to know funding-wise or the expenses. You're absolutely right. Just because it's lower doesn't mean that there's less expenses. Do you happen to have those numbers compared to last year's caseloads, the cost of that compared to this one, even though it's lower?
Expenses with regard to managing a case from the time it's filed, or?
Well, I know you have a graph there that indicates how many caseloads compared to last year's, right?
Case filings?
Yes. Do you also have that with regards to, on a dollar amount?
We don't specifically have dollar amounts tied to each individual case, but in the whole workflow of how a case is filed and all the persons that are involved in managing the case, from the clerk all the way to the judicial officer, the probation officer, we don't have a dollar amount specifically. We have as part of our training on case flow management principles with the National Center for State Courts. When they were here years ago, we have been trying to use performance measures, and I will share that in one of the things we learned in trying to determine the cost to have an actual hearing in a court, we believed it was at a dollar amount of about $200 if we used the performance measure that the National Center was setting out. As an example, every time we have to hold a hearing, from the time that the case is prepared to get before the judge, all those that are involved would be about $220 per hearing.
And of course, Danielle, that's probably based on the type of case, correct? So you're just taking an average of $200 per case, or if you get something more extreme, that those numbers in the assessment that you just gave me is usually substantially more, like
It
in a homicide or versus?
Oh, I think it's not. It wasn't specific to a certain type of case. It would be specific to the amount of staff involvement to prepare for the hearing.
That'd be good to know. On what type of cases, how much it draws compared to other cases, just as a comparative. Okay, thank you. Before I get into this last question, mandatory arbitration. We're the only, U.S. territory and state that actually has this law on mandatory arbitration when it comes to lawsuits against, cases for malpractice. And I was just wondering, I'm doing some research on it, and is there any cost? Well, I know that the individual has to fork out the money for this, but can you just walk me real quickly, a brief on how the courts play a part in this?
Actually, under the law, the court doesn't have jurisdiction under those on those matters that go to arbitration.
But you guys do, if I'm not mistaken, if the two parties can agree, then the courts are the ones that provide the attorney? Not provide one, but appoint.
For medical malpractice, no.
Okay.
For other areas where the court, maybe the parties have contracted to have arbitration,
right.
They may come to court to get the award enforced. So we look at whether or not the award that's made by the arbitrator should be enforced.
I'm strictly talking about medical malpractice, and according to the law that I'm reading on mandatory arbitration, that the court is involved somehow with this. So maybe we can have a sit down. I'll probably call somebody anyways because I'm doing some research on it. But the law does say it, that the court is involved in some way on this. And my last question is, there's an RFP that was sent out for your health insurance, and I was wondering if so it sounds like you're not opting in to go with the executive's insurance, that you're still going on your own on.
Can I ask our staff attorney to answer this?
Sure thing, thanks. Oh, good, I get Christine.
She's admonished all of us not to talk about it, so I'll let her talk.
So unfortunately, we have a protest against the RFP that has come out by the judiciary, so we can only limitedly talk about what the process is. But some of the concerns with the judiciary, with the executive branch, is they likewise have a protest. And if you look at the various laws that govern the health insurance contracts, there are rollover provisions that occur if there's any delay, and a protest would be one. Those rollover provisions are only for those members. So if the protest continues with the executive branch, they would roll over their current members, and under PACA and the various laws, their insurance would continue. Since the judiciary is currently not under the executive branch's insurance,
Right.
we would not be part of that rollover.
That's right. So that means you would have to go out for your RFP like you're doing right now.
That's correct.
And you said that, but there's no protest you haven't awarded anything to provide any kind of protest or anything?
We have a protest currently that that has been filed with the
Okay.
judiciary also.
Wow.
So
would you have to roll over as well? I mean, would that be the option to your current health insurance carrier to roll over to them? Does it allow that opportunity, or you're stuck?
all contracts per law have these rollover provisions.
Okay.
So our past contract has
Okay.
that, or our current
Okay.
contract, I'm sorry, FY2019 contract.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Christine. Okay. Thank you, Chief Justice. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I know you work very hard at the courts for what little that you get, and we'll do our best to give you what you need to continue. Thank you.
Senator Terlahi, the oversight, and then I'll be the final
Thank you.
senator to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. If I could just follow up just a few questions. Christine, if you don't mind. Just what is the basis of the protest? So your RFP is currently under protest, and what did they say? Why are they protesting? Sorry, can you turn that on? Yeah.
I think the basis of the protest has been in the paper. It's over Public Law 35-2.
Because you included that in your RFP?
Yes,
That's all.
our RFP, in our introduction of our RFP, we have 4 GCA 4301 to 4310, I believe, and that's included within our RFP.
All right. Thank you. And Annie, the alternate public defender, can I just ask, so what is your current, how many attorneys do you have right now on board?
Right now we have 4.
Four?
4.
And this budget would be for how many attorneys?
6.
6. And
We would be, actually, I'm having one attorney come back July 8th, so we'll have 5. And so the budget would ask for the 6th attorney that we could not fill last year.
All right. So you went pretty much the fiscal year with the 4. What was what's your caseload like versus last year?
Do I have the numbers? Well, across the board, the filings were down, but we've kept the same. I think last year we had, 1 second. Every quarter we have to submit our numbers to the judiciary. 1 second. Do you have the numbers? 420, right? We have 420. Usually it's about 420 a year, case the total filings. I mean,
And-
that what we get.
And it's consistent, you're saying, in the last
It
few
has
years?
been, well, our highest amount was like in 2000, I want to say 11, but which is consistent with the way the filings have gone with the court. So whenever they go down, we go down because we're the conflicts firm for the public defender. So the way the filings go in court, that's usually we track like that.
All right. All right, thank you. And then, yeah, sorry, if you don't mind, just about the caseload again. If you take out the cases that are handled by the magistrates and the referees, the caseload per judge is somebody sent me statistics that these are decreasing over the year by an average of 247 per judge from 2000 to 2018.
You know, based on the case filings and the case assignments, in accordance with the administrative rule adopted by the Supreme Court, over the course of the last, I don't have the specific numbers on hand, but I do recall that over the last couple of years, each judge perhaps gets an average of about 300 to 400 new case assignments annually, except for the family violence judge, who ideally is in the 500 or something case range now. It's important to note that while case filings have decreased, the average number of cases, according to our random assignment in the administrative rule, is shared between all 7 Superior Court judges, and for some matters to the magistrate judges and our family court referee. As the cases are filed, although the judges may receive 300 or so new case filings, part of that is a general jurisdiction assignment. So although we only had 200 drug case filings going into Judge Socola's docket, for example, she also shares a 1/7 share of general jurisdiction type cases. So the judges already don't operate as a truly therapeutic court judge like other court jurisdictions do in the mainland. But it's also important to understand in those numbers that while numbers have decreased, and as Attorney Gell mentioned, her numbers are 420. Well, if the numbers are going down, why is your docket still high? It's because post-judgment proceedings, therapeutic courts still require the judge to preside over. So just because a judge entered judgment in a DWI treatment court, for example, presiding Judge Lamarena will still have hearings to bring the defendant back with their attorney to make a determination. Are you following the treatment regimen of the docket? We want to see you successfully complete. So while the judges are getting new case filings coming in annually, they're still having to maintain jurisdiction over the cases that are still pending, and we call those post-judgment proceedings.
Thank you. And so could you just cite again that restriction or is it judges that have to preside over follow-ups and treatment, or can that be assigned to magistrates?
Under the current magistrate duties in Title VII, magistrate judges have a limited ability to preside over those matters. So
It's our statutory limit on the magistrates. That's
correct. And I think the intent of when the magistrates statute was passed was to assist the judges in the preliminary stages of cases, for example, magistrate hearings, for example, arraignments, in civil cases, handling pre-trial motions. So not something that requires more substantive work on the judge. I would caution that if we had the, magistrates now entertaining the therapeutic component of the docket, sometimes the probationer wants to see Judge Socola all the time. You'll recognize at some of the graduations they say, "I'm going to miss you, Your Honor," but it's having that interaction with the judge that started with you from the beginning and successfully completed in the end. I think that's the gratifying and rewarding experience that our therapeutic court defendants get from those treatment courts.
Thank you. And can you just clarify, I hope I didn't miss it earlier, but the electronic monitoring, what type of cases? You've already done the rules and regs, and I didn't review them myself, but if you know, what type of cases did you agree that would be that electronic monitoring would be used for, or on occasions?
When the legislature asked us to undertake this, they were looking at pretrial detention. So our program is set up for assessment for high risk, medium risk, and low risk. So we're looking at pretrial detention for low to medium risk defendants.
When you say risk, Your Honor, what do you mean? Risk for what?
I should probably defer to John about
the risk involved, the risk to reoffend, the risks as far as whether or not they're actually going to return to court, whether or not they're going to commit a new crime, whether or not they're going to comply with the conditions. Based on the assessment tool, they're able to determine the risk level. And so looking at which clients can be released or recommended for release. As I pointed out earlier, a client may be eligible, but if they live in a home or that doesn't have utilities, because one of the requirements is for the system to be charged, then obviously we're not able to recommend to the judicial officer for release. But really looking at those risk levels and then making the recommendation to the judge.
Earlier, a couple months ago, maybe a month ago, we had a round table, and we specifically asked the court to tell us what type of what type of assessments were being done prior to pretrial release. And the answer that we got was that they are only assessing their risk of not showing up to the hearing, that they were not assessing the risk to reoffend or that was not being assessed.
No, the risk assessment tool, the pretrial assessment tool under the Ohio risk assessment does have those questions. It's very general. It's not specific. And part of that discussion, if I can recall, was whether or not we can really identify whether or not they're gonna commit a new crime. And I think that was the primary discussion, was the assurance that a new crime or a new offense won't be committed. But we have the risk assessment tool. We also have an eligibility, and we're going to have an assessment tool to determine whether or not they're eligible for electronic monitoring, whether or not their home, the individual is able to be released on electronic monitoring, either GPS or radio frequency.
So is the theory to use this tool for the low risk?
No, the theory is to use this tool for the medium and the moderate risk clients. For those that are low risk, they're still eligible to be released. They're low risk.
Okay.
We would certainly not recommend somebody who is high risk, who just committed another offense or committed multiple offenses. We would not look at making a recommendation to release to a judge to release somebody who's high risk of reoffending or high risk of not even coming into court.
All right, then I'm going to ask if the court could submit something in writing that talks about their assessment tool and it is clear across the board that the tool, the assessment is not assessing risk for reoffending. And we were talking at that time in specific to criminal sexual conduct, reoffense, and they said it was only pretty much to determine or to overall, we're talking about 50 vacancies that the court wants to fill this year. If you get this budget, that's how many you would be able to address, 50?
Yes.
And you think that, I know you're saying that this is past levels that the court has had, but that's all necessary for efficient justice?
For the current, the requested budget for FY20, yes. That'll help us restore the services, maintain our services, our supervising 2 or 3 different sections. We're also losing institutional knowledge when we have all the retirees.
Yes.
And we did take a mass cut of retirees and resignations in January, of course, when the new administration came in. So we do need to fill our critical vacancies. If our funding levels are restored, we're able to recruit and fill those vacancies and meet the needs of the community.
All right. I wanted also to just commend the compiler for the work that's been done so far and the Chief Justice for getting the searchable cases. And I guess I wanted to ask, Jerry, if you don't mind, what is your goal for 2020? What can we expect during 2020, if there will be any additional information put up?
Thank you for the question. We're working hard right now on ensuring that the rules and regulations are as updated as we can. In fact, throughout this year, I've been sending letters out to different department heads now under the new administration regarding the rules and regs that they have and what we have, so ensuring that our records jive. And as soon as that's done in a place where we feel confident, we'd like to put the rules and regs up searchable also.
All right, thank you. And how long will it take to get the Superior Court decisions? Are those,
At this point, we do have a number of years that are ready for upload. Again, it's a matter of ensuring that we have the personnel. The goal right now is 10 years searchable, so up to 2009. In fact, right now we have up to 2008 ready to go. It's a matter of, it is an intense process because it's not just having the rules and regs, but it's ensuring that each document is capable of being uploaded into our system. So just having it issued isn't, is the first step. There are a lot of backdoor or, work that's not seen to prepare each document.
Yes.
And another issue, of course, is I'm sure the legislature is aware with its own website is making them accessible as possible to other users.
yes, and
So we are hoping that we're going to get the 10 years up and running on the website.
you mean current back 10 years?
Yes.
Okay,
In
great.
fact, again, we have up to 2008 ready to go. So it's a
Yes.
matter of ensuring that.
Again, Chief Justice, thank you for that. That's been very helpful, I think, for the practitioners. And I'm looking forward to seeing the AG opinions. The executive orders, are they up? I
The
haven't checked
executive
recently.
orders, we have ready to go. They're not ready to be uploaded searchable yet, but we do have them digitized. We do have the metadata available. So we are looking at going again the same way, backwards looking. So reverse chronological, the most recent to the oldest.
Yes, that would be very helpful.
The AG opinions actually, and I need to meet with the AG also because we found out that they have records that apparently were never transmitted to us, looking at what's on their website and to what we have in our compiler records. So it is a matter of they have some that were not transmitted to us as opinions or as information and guidance.
Are you saying that their website is complete?
They do have more on their website than what we have.
Oh, well
for
then-
certain years.
Oh, yes, because you guys have gone back for years, the law library, keeping those
We have
accessible.
more of some, we have, and
All
there's a
right.
distinction between opinions and information and guidance.
Okay, I see. Yeah, they're making a big distinction between those now and only making the opinions available. is
We'd
my
like to have both.
Yes, thank
We'd like
you.
to have both.
Great. I appreciate your efforts, and Chief Justice, again, I very much appreciate the efforts in the court in that regard. Situs Masi.
Thank you, Senator July, and I'd like to thank my colleagues for your questions. And Mr. Rizama had 20 questions. I'm down to one now after I kept check marking everybody's questions. And that's great. And I'm happy that they asked those questions because they all deal about your budget. Gosh, really, I'm down to just one, and it was the easiest one. Your volunteer deputy marshal reserve, your program. In both the current and proposed staff banner, it appears that some full-time employees also hold a volunteer deputy marshal. Is that true? Or
That is correct. Some of our employees who work administrative roles, like some of them are probation service assistants, some of them are ASAs, clerks. They've actually gone to the Criminal Justice Academy, received their certification, completed the training, and actually work as volunteer deputy marshal reservists. They do that after normal working hours and on weekends. We utilize them on the weekends for Erica's house. We also utilize them after hours for the court security and anything else. But we're very fortunate because we have, I believe it's 8 full-time employees that actually are volunteer deputy marshal reservists. They love the court.
And they are reminded that until they get off at 5, they play the marshal role.
Correct. That's
Not during the day.
Correct.
I don't want anybody being a facilities man saying, "You cannot do that. I'm a marshal." Hey, hold on now.
No, in fact, one of our facility maintenance worker, he's actually a VDMR. His days off are Sunday, Monday, and he does his VDMR work on Sunday, Monday.
Okay.
That's his day off. And he works, but you see him there 7 days a week, 6
Yes,
to
I know.
7 days a week.
I just thought I'd use his position as an example. So he's not applying that. Get away from there, or I'll arrest you. That kind of stuff. But anyway,
Actually, many of them have ambitions to become marshals, so they're hoping they're transitioning into a new position eventually.
yeah, there's more pay there, right? I mean, just thought I'd mention that. And I don't blame them. But you know what, Chief Justice and Mr. Zama, you know, you're an equal branch of government. There's no doubt about that. And my colleagues have all agreed to, have acknowledged that. And we are going to see how we can manage the funds in the government of Guam and see how we can bring you back up to where you should be. You notice how I'm not committing to what you ask, okay? Because I'm not going to do that. Because I know Senator Lai is going to look at me and say, wait a minute, I still got GMH. I know, but I'm just kidding. But we do need to find a way to find where, if you don't get the 35 million, let me just say that, I think it's 36 million you asked for, right? If we can get halfway there, I think that'll be decent, and we find a way to get you to that point. Because there are programs, I know that in the court, you need the funding. There's no doubt about that.
And this year it's becoming more critical because we have, for the most part, exhausted our reserves.
Yes.
And whereas before we could use the Judicial Building Fund for certain purposes, we don't have the income there anymore. So we're to the point again where we would have to seriously evaluate personnel levels, because really that's all we have left to adjust.
All right.
So we do need additional funding as much as possible, just to maintain our current levels
Yes, ma'am.
of work.
We're going to try to figure out a way how to get there for
Thank you.
okay? For an equal branch of Guam government. I want to make sure I keep stressing that so the people of Guam listening understand that the court needs funding no different than the executive, no different than the legislature. And if everybody gets their share, then nobody will complain. And then we can move forward. Is there any other questions from my colleagues? And there appears to be none, and there's no one else to testify. You're all here. There being none, the committee will conclude the budget hearing for the Unified Judiciary for 2020. And if there's anything else you would like to submit, Your Honor and Mr. Lizama, please feel free to submit it to me and the Oversight Chair. And if you want to send it to everybody, there's not a problem either. Okay, the committee will continue to receive testimonies. Please address your testimonies to the Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing, and submit it via email, Senator Joe S. Augustine @gmail.com. Sijus Masi for your attendance and participation in today's hearing. And for those at home, thank you for watching. The budget hearing is now adjourned at 11:03. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Your Honor.